I always knew my story didn't begin the way most people's do. There was no baby book waiting for me, no pictures of proud parents holding me in a hospital room, no stories about how I smiled early or cried late into the night. Instead, what I had was a note. A short, crumpled, nearly unreadable piece of paper that said, "We can't do this. Please take care of our baby." And I was found at a fire station, wrapped in a thin blanket on a cold night. That was the beginning of my life. Abandonment before I ever had a chance to know who I belonged to. Growing up, I learned how to explain that without flinching. I practiced saying it casually like it was just a fact and not a scar. Yeah, I was left at a fire station, but it's okay, I had a good foster family. Sometimes that was true. Sometimes it wasn't. People love to talk about how beautiful adoption and foster care can be, and sometimes it really is. But it can also be confusing, lonely, and heavy in a way a child can't really understand. You learn early to build yourself, to raise yourself, to love yourself first because you don't believe anyone else will stay long enough to do it. I always wondered about them though. The parents who left me. I wondered if they thought of me on my birthdays. I wondered if they regretted it or if they ever pictured who I became. I wondered if I looked like them. I wondered if there was some part of them in me, a laugh, a habit, a way of thinking. There was a time when I wanted to find them. Then there was a time when I promised myself I never would. Life pushed me forward. School, work, friendships that felt almost like family. I learned how to survive. And eventually, I learned how to live. I got a job. I built stability slowly, piece by piece, like someone arranging glass bottles where they might break at any moment. But I did it. I made something of myself. I found peace in being self-made. I thought that would be enough. Everything changed one afternoon when I came home to a letter in my mailbox. There was nothing special about the envelope. No return address. No clue what waited inside. But when I opened it and saw the names signed at the bottom, my chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. It was them. My biological parents. After over 2 decades of silence. After no calls, no searches, no attempts to explain. They had found me. Their letter didn't start with, "We're sorry." There was no explanation. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Instead, they wrote about how they had fallen on hard times. About how they were struggling now that they were older. About how they needed someone to help care for them financially. And then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, they wrote, "You owe us. We brought you into this world." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. I read that letter again and again trying to understand. Trying to believe it was real. I sat on my floor, surrounded by my quiet apartment, and I felt something deep, something old, something I thought I had outgrown, the familiar ache of being unwanted. It was like the wound reopened, but in a new shape. They hadn't come to apologize or reconnect or explain. They came because they needed something from me. A child they left. A child they refused to raise. A child they now expected to support them in their retirement. There was a part of me that wondered if maybe there was more to the story. Maybe they were young. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they didn't have choices. Life can be cruel and sometimes people break under it. But what I couldn't understand, what my heart couldn't find an excuse for, was how they could return not with humility but with entitlement. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how. I didn't know what kind of person I was supposed to be in this moment. Was I the forgiving type? The angry type? The curious type? The type who shut the door again? My whole identity confronted me at once, like I was being forced to answer questions I spent my life avoiding. A week passed before I heard from them again. This time it wasn't just a letter. It was a message. A direct message on social media. They had found my profile. They had seen my life, my job, my accomplishments, my stability, and something about that made the situation feel heavier. They told me their names. Their faces were attached. And suddenly, the abstract parents I had imagined my entire life were real, breathing people. People who had lived and aged and made dozens of decisions without me. I stared at their pictures for a long time. I saw myself in them. And that hurt more than I expected. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my friends. Not my coworkers. I kept it inside, like a secret I wasn't ready to understand. I didn't want advice. I didn't want judgment. I didn't want someone telling me what the right thing to do was. Because there is no right thing when the past returns with its hands open. And just when I thought I had time to process, something else happened. Something that made the situation impossible to ignore. They told me they were coming to see me. They said they had already made travel plans. They said they wanted to talk face to face. And they said, "We hope you'll be reasonable." That was when the calm inside me finally shattered. Because I realized I was about to come face to face with the two people who left me in the cold and expected me to warm their future. And I didn't know what I was going to say when the moment came. But it was coming. Closer and closer and closer. I didn't know what to do with myself after that message. I kept rereading it like maybe the meaning would change if I looked long enough. They were coming here. To my city. My home. My life. A life they had nothing to do with building. I felt like the world suddenly got smaller, like my past had stepped into the same room as my present, and now they were staring at each other with no introduction. I didn't block them even though part of me wanted to. Instead, I just stood in the kitchen staring at my phone, letting the silence of my apartment fill every corner. That silence had always been my companion. I built a peaceful life out of it. But now the silence felt heavier. Like it was waiting for something too. I tried to keep my routine. I went to work the next morning, but my mind wasn't there. I could hear people talking, laughing, typing, but everything felt muffled, like the world was happening behind a window and I was just watching. At lunch, I sat outside on a bench and tried to breathe. I kept thinking about what I might say when I saw them. Would I demand answers? Would I ask why? Or would I just listen? I didn't know. I realized then that I didn't actually know anything about them. Not their story. Not their circumstances. Not the reasons they left me. I didn't know if they were cruel, broken, desperate, or something in between. Growing up, I built imaginary versions of them. Some days they were careless and heartless. Other days they were victims of their own pain. Some days they were teenagers who didn't know how to handle a baby. Some days they were people who regretted everything and lived with guilt. But now I had to face whoever they actually were. When I got home that night, I sat down with the only person who had known me before I could speak. The firefighter who found me. His name is Marcus, and he's one of those people who speaks softly but carries a presence that fills a room. I call him Uncle Marcus, though we aren't related. He was just the first human on earth who held me with care. That kind of connection is real even without blood. He invited me over for dinner when I told him I needed to talk. He's older now, retired from the station, living in a small house with a garden he spent years tending to. He's the kind of man who has seen a lot in life but still chooses gentleness anyway. We sat on his porch while the sun was setting. The sky was soft and warm, like it was trying to comfort me. "They found me," I said, staring at my hands. He didn't act surprised. He just nodded slowly. "I always wondered if they would," he said. "People carry the weight of choices like that. Sometimes it pulls them back." I swallowed, feeling the tightness in my throat. They want me to support them. Financially. They said I owe them for giving me life. Marcus let out a quiet breath, not angry, not shocked, just sad. "You don't owe anyone for being born," he said. "Life is something you grow into, not something someone hands you like a gift with strings attached." I felt my chest loosen just a little. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel," I admitted. "Part of me wants to meet them and finally know the truth. But another part of me just wants to protect what I built. I worked so hard to have this life. I don't want to be dragged backward." Marcus tilted his head. "It's okay not to know yet. You're human. And humans don't figure things out all at once. You'll know what to do when you're standing in front of the moment. Not before." I thought about that. It made more sense than anything else I'd heard. Before I left his house, he handed me something I had never seen before. A baby blanket. The one I was wrapped in the night he found me. I held it carefully, afraid it might fall apart. It was old, faded, and thin, but it felt like a piece of my beginning that I didn't know still existed. "There's no rush to decide," he said. "Just remember, your future is yours. Nobody gets to claim it unless you let them." That night, I slept with the blanket beside me. Not wrapped in it, just near enough to feel like I was holding the past gently instead of fighting it. The next few days were slow but not calm. I felt like every part of my life had cracks in it now. I went to work. I answered emails. I made coffee. But under the surface was this constant hum of anticipation. Then one evening I got another message. A simple one. "We arrive tomorrow. We hope to meet you at the cafe near the station at 4 p.m. It wasn't a request. It was an expectation. I stared at the screen for a long time. I could feel something inside me shifting. I wasn't afraid of them. I wasn't angry in a loud way. I was just ready. Ready to see who they were. Ready to face the truth. Ready to look at the people who shaped my first breath and then walked away. The next day came slowly. Every hour felt stretched. I kept trying to predict how I would feel the moment I saw them. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady. But heavy, like it was preparing itself for impact. I arrived early. The cafe was small, quiet, the kind of place people went to work on laptops or drink tea while reading a book. I chose a table near the window because I wanted to see them before they saw me. I wanted to have a moment to breathe. Minutes passed. then more. And then I saw them. Two people standing outside the cafe door. Older, smaller than I imagined. Their expressions were not soft. They were tight, anxious, expectant, like they were stepping into a conversation they believed they had already earned. When they walked in, I recognized them instantly. I didn't know them, but I recognized them. They sat down across from me. No hug. No tears. No warm greeting. Just reality. My mother, the woman who gave birth to me, spoke first. Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed. "We knew you would come," she said. And something in me, something deep and old and tired, braced itself. Because this wasn't going to be simple. This wasn't going to be gentle. And this conversation was only just beginning. My mother's voice didn't match the moment. It didn't shake or break or sound like someone facing a child they once left behind. It sounded steady, almost practiced, like she had gone over these words many times in her head. My father sat beside her, silent, his hands folded stiffly in his lap. He looked at me, but his eyes didn't hold warmth. They held expectation. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at them, trying to understand who they were beyond this moment. They looked tired. Not just physically, but tired in a way that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. But there was also a certain sharpness to them, a guardedness, as if they had come prepared to defend themselves. My mother cleared her throat. "We wanted to talk to you face to face," she said. "There are things you don't know about why we made the decisions we made." I nodded, but not to agree. I just nodded to say I was listening. My father finally spoke. "We were young. Too young, really. And we didn't have support. No family who would help. No jobs. No stability. We didn't know how to raise a child." I listened to the words, but they floated past me, not quite landing. I had imagined something like this. I had prepared myself for it. But hearing it out loud made it feel different. More real. More complicated. My mother's voice softened just a little. "We thought you'd have a better life if someone else raised you." There it was, the explanation many people would call noble, even loving. But it was hard to accept kindness from the same act that left me with so much confusion. I leaned back in my chair and studied them. "If that's true," I said slowly, "why didn't you ever check on me?" "Not once. Not a letter. Not a call. Not anything." My mother's lip twitched, but she didn't look away. "Because we were ashamed," she said. "And because years went by and it got harder to face. And then too much time passed." That part I could understand. Shame grows. It doesn't fade. But there was still something missing. I looked at them again. "So why reach out now?" My mother and father exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of sadness or remorse. It was a look of shared strategy, like they had agreed on how to present this moment. My father answered, "We're getting older. We're struggling financially. We need help." And suddenly, the emotional door I had been holding open began to close. Not slam. Just close bit by bit. I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch. Let them sit in it. Let them feel the weight of what they were asking. My mother folded her hands together, her voice gentler now, almost pleading. "We brought you into this world. And in our culture, children take care of their parents. You are our child." The words "you are our child" landed like something heavy and cold. I let out a slow breath. "I am your child by blood," I said carefully. "But you didn't raise me. Someone else did." The words felt like a truth I had always known but never said. My father's jaw tightened. "We still gave you life. You exist because of us. That means something." Something inside me flickered. A pressure, a memory of being small and wanting answers that never came. But now I wasn't that small child. I had grown into someone who learned how to stand on my own feet. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just listened as they talked about hardships, bills, medication, housing struggles, long years of trying and failing to build a stable life. They weren't lying. I could hear the truth in the exhaustion of their voices. But there was another truth too. They weren't here because they suddenly wanted to know me. They were here because they needed something from me. And that hurt in a way that didn't explode. It just settled inside quietly. When they finished talking, my mother leaned forward slightly. "We know this is difficult. But we were hoping you'd consider helping us. Even a small amount each month. Something consistent. Something we can depend on." I looked at them, at their faces, at the history we didn't share, at the years that sat between us like miles of empty road. "I need time," I said. My mother nodded like she expected that answer. "Of course. We're staying in town for a little while. We can meet again when you're ready." We stood up. No one hugged. No one held hands. No one cried. We just walked out of the cafe and stood awkwardly on the sidewalk. My mother looked at me as if searching for something familiar. "You look healthy," she said softly. "You look, well." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. They turned and walked away, and I watched them until they disappeared into the moving crowd. The moment they were gone, the air felt heavier, not lighter. I sat back down on a bench outside the cafe and stared at the street, watching people walk past each other with lives full of things I would never know. I tried to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something more complicated, the kind of feeling you have when life hands you a door you didn't ask for and now expects you to decide whether to open it. I went home and called Marcus. I didn't even say hello. I just sat there breathing, the silence thick. He didn't ask me to explain. He just waited until I was ready. Finally, I said quietly, "They didn't come back for me. They came back for help." Marcus didn't sound surprised. "Sometimes people only know how to ask for love by asking for something else," he said. "But that doesn't mean you owe it." I closed my eyes. But there's something in me that still wants to know them. Not to help them. Not to fix anything. Just to understand. "That's human," he said. "Understanding doesn't equal obligation." I nodded even though he couldn't see it. He continued, "You don't have to decide today. Let the truth settle. Let your heart settle. Then you'll know your next step." And that was where I was left, in the quiet space between past and present, between what I was owed and what I was willing to give, between the life I had built and the life that shaped my beginning. The story wasn't finished yet. I could feel something else underneath their words, something they hadn't told me, something I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. Days passed, but my mind didn't rest. I kept replaying their words, their expressions, the way they sat across from me like strangers pretending to be something familiar. I tried to let the thoughts fade, but they stayed. Even in the middle of work, even while cooking, even while lying in bed at night, there was a quiet question repeating inside me. What am I supposed to do with this? But beneath that question, something else lingered. A feeling that there was more to the story than they had shared. I didn't know if it was instinct or memory, or just the way my mother's voice hesitated on certain sentences. But something didn't feel finished. One evening, I drove to the fire station where I had been left as a baby. I had been there before with my adoptive mom when I was young, but back then, I didn't understand what that place really meant. Now I did. The station was quiet, lights humming softly. A man in uniform stood near the trucks, wiping down equipment. I introduced myself and asked if anyone who had worked there back then was still around. He looked surprised but pointed me toward a door in the back. Inside, an older man sat at a desk with paperwork spread out in front of him. His hair was mostly gray, and his face carried the kind of lines that come from years of service, worry, and life. When I told him who I was, his expression shifted to something gentle. "I remember that night," he said quietly. "We don't forget things like that." I sat down slowly, unsure if I was ready to hear what came next. He spoke carefully, like someone who had learned to handle delicate truths. "Your parents didn't just show up and leave you. They were scared. Your mother was crying. Your father kept pacing. They looked like they had been running, like something had gone very wrong." I held my breath. He continued. "They stayed for a while, longer than most. Your mother held you for a long time before letting go. Your father told us they couldn't keep you safe. Not that they didn't want you. That they couldn't." The words hit harder than I expected. Couldn't keep me safe. Not didn't want me. What did they mean? I asked. He shook his head. "We asked, but they didn't explain. They just said they had to go. That if they didn't, you wouldn't make it either." My heart started to beat faster. This wasn't the story they told me. This was something else. Before leaving, the firefighter handed me an old, worn envelope. "This was left with you," he said. "We kept it with your early records in case someone ever came back for you." My hands trembled as I held it. I didn't open it right away. I drove home, the envelope heavy in my lap. At home, I sat on the couch and stared at it. It felt like the kind of thing that could change everything, or nothing. Marcus came over when I called. I didn't even have to explain. I just handed him the envelope and he sat beside me, close enough that I felt steady. When I finally opened it, there was a folded letter inside. The handwriting was uneven, rushed, emotional. "We want you to have a future that we can't give. There are people after us. We made mistakes. We can't protect you anymore. We love you. We hope one day you'll understand." My chest tightened. Not anger this time. Something heavier. Something like grief. There were no names mentioned. No details. No explanation of who was after them or why. But it was clear. They didn't abandon me because they didn't care. They abandoned me because they believed it would save me. The world shifted under me for a moment, like the ground was no longer where I thought it was. But then another thought crept in, slow, cautious, unsettling. If they ran, if they were hiding, if there were people they feared back then, were those people still a threat now? And had my parents' sudden reappearance put all of us back into something we didn't understand? My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "We need to talk again. It's urgent." It was from my mother. Marcus saw my face and didn't even ask. "What changed?" he whispered. I didn't know. But I could feel it. Something had shifted. Something was coming that I wasn't ready for. The next meeting wasn't in a cafe. It was in a quiet park far from the city center. My parents looked different this time, tense, looking over their shoulders, speaking in low voices. My mother's hands shook. "We shouldn't have come back," she said. "But we didn't have a choice. They found us again." My father's voice was low and urgent. "And now, they know about you." The world around us seemed to freeze. Every unanswered question, every missing piece, every moment of confusion, it all pointed to this. Not just abandonment, not just regret, not just financial request. There was something darker beneath it. Something unfinished. Something coming closer. And I could feel the story reaching a point where everything I thought I knew was about to collide with everything I never knew. The real reason they left me was finally coming to the surface. And whatever it was, it wasn't going to leave any of us untouched. My father's words hung in the air like a cold wind. "They know about you." That sentence alone felt heavy, but it was my mother's expression that shook me. She looked like someone who had been running her entire life and had finally run out of places to go. Her eyes scanned the park, her fingers twisting together, her voice barely holding steady. "I know this sounds unreal," she said. "But everything we did back then was to keep you alive. We didn't leave you because we wanted to. We left because we believed it was the only way to break their trail." I asked who they were, but my father's jaw tightened instead of answering. He looked at me in a way I had never been looked at before, like I was someone they had been missing in mourning, but also someone whose presence terrified them. "We shouldn't talk here," he finally said. "It isn't safe." The words hit differently now. Not dramatic, not exaggerated. More like a fact spoken from exhaustion. I felt Marcus shift beside me. His hand brushed mine, grounding me. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His silence meant support. We left the park in separate directions. I returned home with Marcus, though the world around me felt blurry and slightly unreal. I tried to imagine my parents' lives all these years. Hiding, running, looking over their shoulders. It didn't fit the bitter picture I had created in my head for so long. But at the same time, what had they done that was so dangerous? What mistake had cost them their freedom and my childhood? 4 days, communication came only through short, anxious text messages from my mother. No explanations. Just warnings. Directions. Instructions I didn't know if I should follow. Then one night, another message came. "You need to see something." A location was attached. A place on the outskirts of town, quiet, isolated, almost forgotten. Marcus insisted on driving. I didn't argue. The drive felt long, though the road was empty and the night was still. When we arrived, my parents were already there. Not in a house. Not in a cafe. But in an old storage unit rental area, the kind where each numbered unit had a roll-up door and dust-covered pavement stretching between them. My father unlocked one of them and slid the door upward. Inside were boxes. Dozens of them. Maybe more. Stacked and organized like a life that was once packed in a rush and never fully unpacked. Papers. Files. Old photographs. A few infant items that I recognized only from adoption records. My mother picked up a folder. "We kept everything we could carry," she murmured. "Proof in case one day we could explain." She opened it, and that's when I saw the first twist that shattered the story I thought I knew. My father had once worked for a company, one whose name I recognized because it was everywhere. A massive corporation known for real estate development, public contracts, and shiny advertisements promising to build a better future. My father was once a financial analyst for them. The kind of job that sounds comfortable, secure, ordinary. But the documents he showed me were not ordinary. They detailed financial reports, altered ones. Money moved in and out of invisible accounts. Public funds redirected. Signatures replicated. Records wiped clean. He hadn't been part of the crime. He had uncovered it. And when he tried to report it, he was threatened. Not legally, not professionally, personally. They made it clear that he and anyone connected to him were no longer safe. That included me. My parents hadn't run because they were guilty. They ran because someone powerful didn't want the truth to come out. I looked at the documents again. Dates, account names, signatures. This wasn't petty fraud. It was the kind of thing that could ruin reputations, careers, maybe even elections. The kind of thing people would do anything to keep buried. And now, my father said quietly, they're running out of places to hide money. People are asking questions again. Someone must have remembered us. That's why we were found. That's why we reached out. We need your help. For a moment I almost laughed. My help? The child they left behind, the child they didn't raise, the child who spent years wondering why she wasn't wanted. Now they needed something from me. But they saw something in my expression because they both spoke at once. Not money, my mother said quickly, as if reading my thoughts. No, my father added. We need you to tell the truth. They won't believe us. They'll call us liars, criminals, unstable. But you have a life they can't trace back. You have a voice that doesn't look like a threat. You could expose them. The second plot twist hit then, not in their documents but in their motive. They didn't come back for salvation. They came back for help. Not emotional reconciliation. Not closure. They came back because they needed me to do something impossible. Marcus exhaled slowly. He didn't say no. He didn't say yes either. He just looked at me like he was giving me space to breathe. I felt everything at once. Confusion, anger, sympathy, disbelief, fear, and something I hadn't expected. The sense that my life had been woven into something larger long before I ever understood it. I looked at my parents. Their faces were tired, worn, uncertain. They didn't look like villains. They looked like people who had survived things no one would believe. But I also couldn't ignore the child inside me who still felt abandoned. The silence stretched, heavy, expectant. And then my phone buzzed. A new message. From an unknown number again. But this time it contained only 5 words. Don't trust anything they say. My heart stopped. My parents paled. And the storage unit suddenly felt smaller. Tighter. Like we weren't alone anymore. Something had shifted again. And the story was nowhere near done. My parents froze when they saw the message on my phone. My mother's hand instinctively moved toward me, like she wanted to take the phone away, while my father stepped closer as if to shield us from something invisible. The air inside that storage unit changed. It felt heavier. Like something was closing in. I asked them if they knew who sent the message. They didn't answer right away. My father slowly exhaled and said he had expected something like this eventually. That once we opened those boxes, once we began talking again, the people who had been watching them before would find a way to watch me too. He told me that whoever sent the message could have been someone from the corporation trying to manipulate me. But the look in his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely sure. For the first time since meeting them again, there was fear in his face. Not just caution or anxiety but real fear. Made my stomach twist. Marcus stepped closer to me, his body tense, like he was preparing for something he couldn't yet name. I asked them directly this time what exactly they wanted from me. Calmer than before, my father explained that if I came forward with the documents, if I spoke publicly, I wouldn't be dismissed the same way they would. They were seen as fugitives. I was seen as someone untouched by that past. My voice would be believed more than theirs. But my mother didn't seem so certain. She kept looking toward the door of the storage unit as if waiting for someone to appear. I didn't understand why until headlights flashed across the pavement. Marcus moved instinctively in front of me. My parents tensed. The car didn't pull all the way in. It stopped just before the entrance. The headlights shut off. And for a moment there was silence. Then the car door opened. A man stepped out. Middle-aged. Clean-cut. Suit jacket. Nothing about him looked threatening, but the quiet confidence in his steps was unsettling. He walked toward us as if he had been here before. He stopped a few feet away and looked directly at me. You don't know me, he said calmly. But I've been looking for you for a long time. My mother whispered his name. Her voice cracked. She didn't have to explain who he was. Her reaction told me enough. This was the man they had been running from. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't raise a hand. He simply began talking like he was explaining something reasonable. He said my father had discovered financial misconduct, yes, but not by one company. By several. A network. People with power in multiple layers of business and government. He said coming forward would not just expose corruption, it would destabilize industries, cost thousands of people their jobs, and put my life under the kind of scrutiny no one could recover from. He said helping my parents meant choosing a life where we were all hunted. He said staying silent meant keeping my safety, peace, and future. It was the reverse of what my parents had said. 2 versions of truth and both sounded like they could be real. He slowly reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a business card. He placed it on a nearby box. If you want answers, he said, real answers, the kind that aren't distorted by fear or guilt, call the number on that card. I'll tell you what your parents won't. He walked away just as calmly as he arrived. No dramatic threats. No demands. He didn't even look back. My parents looked terrified. Marcus looked confused. And I felt something I couldn't name. We left the storage unit and went home. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even lie down. I just sat at the kitchen table with the letter from the fire station, the folder from the storage unit, and the business card from the man who had been hunting my family. By morning, I knew I needed to know the truth, no matter what it was. I didn't go alone. Marcus came with me. I called the number. The man answered immediately as if he had been waiting. We met in a quiet public space. Neutral. Safe. He didn't act like a villain. He didn't pressure me. He didn't even ask what decision I had made. Instead, he pulled out documents, different from the ones in the storage unit. His documents showed that my father had not simply uncovered corruption. He had been involved in it first. Not intentionally at the start, but gradually, slowly, piece by piece, until one day he realized what he was part of and panicked. He tried to back out, and when he threatened to report it, everything collapsed. My parents hadn't just been hiding from danger. They were hiding from consequences. I sat there quietly, listening, not knowing which version of the story was true. Both sides had evidence. Both had reasons. Both had fear behind their actions. So I did the only thing I could. I went home and asked my parents to tell me everything without leaving anything out. And finally they did. They admitted my father had been involved, yes, but they insisted he stopped before anything permanent was done. They admitted they ran, yes, but they insisted they did it to protect me. They admitted they came back now because they were tired, broke, and cornered, but they also admitted they came because they missed me. The climax wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It wasn't dramatic. It was pain. Raw human pain. The kind you don't get to rewrite. And then came the twist I didn't expect. My mother handed me another envelope, one I hadn't seen. Inside was a bank account number. Over the years, quietly, secretly, without anyone knowing, she had been putting away money for me. Small amounts at a time. Sometimes just a few dollars. Sometimes nothing for months. But over the years it added up. Not to pay for our retirement, she said. Not to fix anything. Just so you'd have something of us that wasn't loss. My parents weren't innocent. But they weren't monsters either. They were human. Flawed. Broken. Afraid. Just like me. The story didn't end with revenge or punishment or forgiveness. It ended with understanding. And the realization that sometimes the truth isn't one-sided. Sometimes the truth is complicated. And sometimes the truth asks you not to choose who was right, but to choose who you want to become after knowing it. I didn't make any big decisions right away. That was the first real choice I allowed myself. For so long, everything felt like a reaction. Reacting to abandonment, reacting to reunion, reacting to fear, reacting to secrets. But after hearing the whole truth, I needed space. I needed to remember that I was a person with my own life, not just the missing piece of someone else's story. So I asked my parents to give me a little time. Not years. Just time to breathe and let the shock settle. They agreed without arguing. Maybe because they finally understood that I wasn't the child they left behind. I was an adult now, someone with boundaries and self-worth and a life I had built from the ground up. Marcus stayed by my side through all of it, not pushing, not suggesting what he thought I should do. Just being there. There were evenings where we didn't talk at all, just sat on the couch while the room was quiet. He knew my thoughts were crowded, and he gave them space without making me feel like I was sinking. I realized in that silence that sometimes love isn't loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's steady. It's presence. It's the kind of support that doesn't demand credit or control. I didn't say it then, but I knew I loved him for that. As days passed, I began to look through the documents more slowly. Without panic. Without urgency. Not to pick sides, but to understand. There were truths in both versions of the story. My father had been part of something wrong. But he had also tried to stop it. My parents had left because of danger, but they had also left without looking back. They had loved me, but their love had been shaped by fear, not understanding. Everything was complicated, but life usually is. Sometimes we want a clear villain and a clear hero because that makes our pain easier to carry. But real life doesn't give us that kind of clean. Eventually, I met with the man who had appeared in the storage unit again, but this time I wasn't scared and I wasn't alone. I brought a lawyer. I brought documentation. I brought clarity. I didn't agree to expose anything publicly. I didn't agree to cover anything up either. I simply let him know that I was aware now and that I would be watching. He couldn't manipulate me. He couldn't frighten me. He couldn't use my parents against me or use me against them. And once he realized that I wasn't a weak link or a pawn, he backed off. Not with threats. Not with anger. Just a quiet acknowledgement that I was no longer an unknown variable. With that pressure easing, I was able to talk to my parents again, not as a broken child or a savior they needed, but as a person trying to understand two other people. We didn't fix everything overnight. You can't undo years of distance, hurt, or misunderstanding that quickly. But we started small. They began telling me stories, not about danger or running, but about who they were before everything went wrong. I learned my mother liked to collect postcards from places she'd never been. I learned my father once wanted to be a teacher. I learned that they had dreams too before fear reshaped them. And I shared small pieces of my life in return. The first time I rode a bike, the college graduation they never saw, my favorite movie, the way I can't drink coffee after 6 p.m. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was connection. And connection was enough to start. I also decided not to use the money my mother had saved. Not then. Not as a reward or a symbol or an apology. I asked her to keep it. I told her I didn't need it to feel like I had a place in her life. What I needed was honesty, communication, and effort moving forward. She cried quietly when I said that, not out of guilt but relief. Maybe she had been waiting for years to hear that there was still hope. And maybe I had been waiting too, even if I didn't realize it. In the end, my parents didn't ask me to pay for their retirement after all. The more we talked, the more they understood why that request had stung so deeply. They began looking for small jobs they could do without putting themselves at risk. They reached out to a small support organization that helps people rebuild their lives after leaving dangerous or unstable situations. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. And I supported them, not as their savior but as someone who wanted them to have another chance, the same way I had needed one once. The biggest change wasn't in them. It was in me. I stopped defining myself by the abandonment. I stopped letting that pain dictate how I saw myself. I began to see my life not as something that happened because they left, but as something I built in spite of it and eventually beyond it. And that, I realized, is the real heart of the story. Sometimes closure isn't one moment. It's not one apology or one explanation. It's the slow, steady rebuilding of identity. It's understanding that healing is not about erasing the past, but about owning it and choosing how it shapes you. I didn't gain a perfect family in the end. I gained the truth. I gained understanding. And I gained the freedom to define my life on my own terms. That was enough.